This presentation is a broad overview on the United States in World War II. Causes of the war were the failure of the Treaty of Versailles, the League of Nations and their several problems, the signing of the Munich Agreement, the political values between the United States, Germany, and Japan, and the U.S. being neutral, and the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Treaty of Versailles was created on June 28, 1919, after World War I. It was signed between Germany and the Allied powers. The treaty required Germany to accept responsibility of the war and also made Germany disarm, pay reparations to countries forming the entity powers, and make substantial territorial concessions. Germany started violating the treaty by rebuilding the armed forces in 1935. By March of 1935, Adolf Hitler created a new navy, an air force, and the first full armored divisions. A year later, Hitler violated the treaty again by reoccupying Rhineland, which was a demilitarized zone. In March 1938, Hitler annexed Austria, and then in September of that same year, he annexed Sudetenland. By March 1939, Hitler occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia. Finally, on September 1st, 1939, Hitler violated the treaty for the last time by invading Poland. The picture here shows Nazi soldiers evacuating Polish civilians out of their country. The League of Nations was founded in 1919 and 1920. This would be the beginning of the United Nations that we have today. The goals of the League were to prevent war by using a collective security, disarmament, and settling disputes with negotiation and arbitration. The League had similar troubles with the Treaty of Versailles in keeping countries demilitarized. The League was set out to design a disarmament plan. The treaty reflected on the League of Nations because every time the treaty was not followed, the League would lose support. Japan and Germany would withdraw from the League in 1933, and Italy withdrew in 1937. These countries saw the many flaws with the League of Nations. The U.S. refused to join the League. This limited the success of the organization because the United States was one of the most powerful countries. The Munich Agreement was signed on September 29, 1938 in Munich, Germany. The agreement was a permit for Nazi Germany to annex Sudetenland. Sudetenland was important because it bordered almost all of Czechoslovakia, making the country very vulnerable. Here are government officials meeting in Munich. The meeting consisted of Nazi Germany, France, Britain, and Italy. Political values. The United States had a form of representative democracy. This was federal and state government working together. However, the causes of the war did not quite affect or involve the United States as it did the Axis powers. In Nazi Germany, they referred to themselves as National Socialists. This was a form of fascism that involved anti-Semitism and biological racism. Nazism was a far-right-wing group. They viewed Jews as their greatest threat and rejected liberalism, democracy, and Marxism. Imperial Japan's government was absolute constitutional monarchy. Japan had a large amount of industrialization and militarization. They wanted to expand its control over the Asia-Pacific regions. So they began invading surrounding countries for more land, which did not bode well for the relationship between the United States and these two countries. U.S. neutrality. The Neutrality Act of 1937 kept the United States out of World War II, and also stated that the U.S. cannot trade with any belligerent states. Japan invaded Manchuria, causing Roosevelt to shut off trade with Japan. The Japanese were aggravated with the U.S. and viewed them as Japan's largest threat in the Pacific. In Europe, The increasing defeat of France and bad conditions of Britain led the United States to accelerate defense preparations. Pearl Harbor. It is a naval base in Hawaii and was viewed as the largest threat to Japan and their aggressive activity in the Pacific. Pearl Harbor had the largest stockpile of U.S. naval ships and air bases in the Pacific. The Japanese unleashed a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. The next day, December 8th, USA enters World War II. The picture here shows the sinking of the USS Arizona, which was one of the 8 battleships stationed at Pearl Harbor. Military involvement in Africa. The Allies in Africa were Britain, US, and some French soldiers. The Axis consisted of Germany and Italy. Operation Torch's objectives were to relieve pressure on the Russians, gain French Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, to try and enlist colonies to join the war, assist Britain in destroying the Axis, open up the Mediterranean to Allied ships, shorten the Allied route to Europe, and prepare Allies for further operations. The two main areas of fighting were the 2 landings in the Strait of Gibraltar and Strait in Algeria. Tunisia, Casablanca, and Cape Bon Peninsula were other areas of major battles. The military leaders in Africa for America were General Eisenhower, who commanded the invasion forces, Major General George S. Patton, who led the 1st Armored Corps, and Major General Lloyd W. Fredendall, who commanded the United States 2nd Corps. Germans and Italians surrendered on May 12, 1943. Military involvement in Europe. Allies gathered in Britain to launch the largest amphibious attack on the European coast. D-Day was June 6, 1944. This was the start of America's Operation Overlord. The United States had a large buildup of men and supplies on the beachhead in northern France. U.S.'s plans were to have Britain lure the German armor towards the British sector as the United States continued attacking areas around St. Lo. General Patton's United States Third Army secured well-needed ports, which led for the success of the plan, which was to gain ground inland in order to set up air and supply bases. Allies planned to move into Germany on a broad front from here. Operation Dragoon was set up in southern France. The United States invaded the Mediterranean shores of France with the objective to stop the reinforcements of German forces to Normandy and provide a line of communications through ports for the Allies. Strong U.S. leaders in Europe were General Patton and his United States Third Army that gained the ports, General Bradley's U.S. First Army, and later combining the First and Third Armies to have the 12th Army group that pushed south of Ardennes, and Lieutenant General Alexander Patch's United States 7th Army that invaded the Mediterranean. VE Day was May 8, 1945, meaning Victory Europe. Here are U.S. soldiers storming the beaches of Normandy during D-Day. Military involvement in the Pacific. The U.S. joined the war in retaliation to Pearl Harbor. U.S. Navy battles introduced the way of carrier battles. The battles at Coral Sea and the battles of Midway sparked a turning point for the Pacific. Another large carrier battle was the Battle of the Philippine Seas. The use of the Marines helped the U.S. in the Pacific. Marines landed on Guadalcanal and then Solomon. They used island hopping in the Solomon Islands to defeat Japanese stations all over the area. This strategy allowed for the U.S. to strike the enemy's weak points. Marines also advanced in Central Pacific with the defeat of Tarawa. Admiral Nimitz led the Navy conquest, and General MacArthur controlled the Army involvement in the Pacific. They succeeded by using carrier battles and island hopping to their advantage. VJ Day was declared on September 2nd, 1945, meaning Victory Japan. The picture here shows pilots on a U.S. carrier. Main causes of victory. Key to the victory in Europe was the strategy of swarming Germany from all sides and cutting off reinforcement routes. In the Pacific, the ability to gain many islands was important for the advances of the Navy. The fall of Hitler and Mussolini. After the Soviets reached Berlin, Hitler wound up committing suicide. For Mussolini, he was killed by Italian partisans during his attempt to escape to Switzerland. Japan planned badly for the Pacific War. Their military was too spread out and they did not have enough supplies. Also, the United States started relying more on tanks, paratroopers, island hopping, and aircraft carriers. Diplomatic views. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the 32nd president. He wanted to expand and re-equip the Navy and Army. U.S. diplomatic missions were with exiled governments in Europe. The aim was to keep a good alliance for the help in overthrowing the Axis. Wartime diplomacy set up the Yalta Conference that was held between February 4th and 11th in 1945. Heads of the United States, Great Britain, and Soviet Union met to discuss the re-establishment of the nations of Europe that were in shambles. They also decided to split up Germany into 4 zones, and Germany was demilitarized once again. Technology advancements. Large weaponry advancements were with the new jet fighters and the common use of war bombers in the sky. Many tanks were being used because they had strong armor and great firepower. For example, the German Panzer Division, which was feared greatest by the Allies. Naval warfare surrounded itself with aircraft carriers and submarines. Radar and sonar became important discoveries during the war, allowing for the U.S. to detect enemy planes and ships. Code breaking and ballistics tables brought out the need for the development of electronic computer technology. Semi-automatic rifles, like the M1 Garand, had become the most reliable small arms. Assault rifles, developed which allowed soldiers to have constant fire on targets. With medicine, the widespread use of penicillin was most important because it would help to treat wounds and bacterial disease, causing for less death. The atomic bomb was by far the most profound advancement for the war. There was a strong race to see who could build it the best between the Allies and Axis. This bomb could basically just devastate entire cities and areas of a nation. The end.